Well, it is my outstanding honor to welcome my friend John Jacob Schmidt from Amron here with us today. So, John is the founder and national director of Amron, American Redoubt Radio Operators Network. This is a patriot-oriented nationwide emergency communications network for disasters and civil defense. He's a Desert Storm veteran deployed with the 5th Special Forces and 3rd Special Forces Group as communications and specialist radio operator back in 91, and started Radio Free Redoubt in 2011, which is a podcast promoting self-reliance and strengthening of conservative traditional American ideals. So now Amron, many years later, has members in all 50 states, Puerto Rico, Canada, Japan, South Africa, and it has activated and responded to multiple real-world disasters in the past 10 years, in addition to having regularly scheduled practice nets and simulated emergency training exercises. That's one heck of a communications resume. So thanks so much for being here with us, John.
My pleasure to be here, and I appreciate what you're doing as well, and given a platform and another opportunity to get the word out about the importance of communications, especially in the very challenging times that we have ahead.
It is.
And it's often one of the most overlooked areas in the preparedness checklist.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the lifestyle of being a patriot or a prepper, if you will, or just a citizen that wants to be self-reliant. They see what's going on. They see the landscape.
Yes.
Geopolitically, socially, and things are breaking down. They don't seem to be getting better. What does that mean for us? And what lessons can we learn from that, apply from the past, anticipate what that might mean for us in the future, and then kind of get ahead of that curve by preparing for that now?
Yes. Yeah. 100%. I can attest to it being like the lowest priority until I joined the military. Actually, having grown up a prepper,
Right.
We did everything. Like we did homesteading, we did a lot of self-defense training, we worked with weapons, we did some medical skills. But when it came to communications, we had very, very little.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
weapons and tactics are sexy and cool.
Yeah.
You know, comms isn't.
Right.
And a lot of times people think that that's, something for the nerdy types.
Mm-hmm.
It's not cool. The only thing that's cool about it is the cool, tactical headset with the boom mic,
Yeah.
right? They want to make sure that that's part of the kit
Sure.
because it looks cool, but that's it.
Mm-hmm.
The skills are really lacking.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's so many different components to communications. I liken it to your medical training.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we should be working with groups, mutual assistance groups, or your militia, or your church security team, or whatever. You have some disaster response
Mm-hmm.
group that you belong to. Not everybody needs to be an EMT.
Sure.
And every group needs to have an EMT at least. But that doesn't mean everybody needs to be an EMT.
Yeah.
However, every single person in your group should know how to put on a tourniquet.
Mm-hmm.
They should know how to stop bleeding. They should know basic field care, trauma care. That doesn't mean they have to be an EMT.
Mm-hmm.
Every person in your group should know how to make a radio call. They should have communications to reach out, to share information, to ask for help, to give directions.
Yes.
That needs to be in the hands of every member of your group. That doesn't mean every person in your group needs to get their ham license.
Mm-hmm.
But you should have a dedicated comms team, like any group has a dedicated medic team that has at least an EMT, a paramedic, a nurse, a doctor. Those people specialize in that. Mm-hmm. So communications is no different. Every group should really prioritize establishing a communications team where they are the EMTs of the group in terms of comms.
Right.
They're the ones that are dedicated to it. And every group has somebody with the aptitude and the desire. It just fits them.
Mm-hmm.
That it's not for everybody. Being an EMT is not for everybody. Just like, everybody should know how to use a firearm, basic fundamental tactics.
Mm-hmm.
but that doesn't mean everybody has to be a graduate of the most advanced, tactical schools and
Sure.
sniper courses and everything else. You have people that do specialize in that, and then they bring their skills back
Hmm.
to the group, and you cross train in that. So everybody knows how to operate their own radio. They know how to operate their basic, IFAC
Hmm.
and put on a tourniquet. Everybody knows how to manipulate their firearm, change magazines, and use fundamental team tactical skills.
Hmm.
So with with radio communications, you do have to have some people that specialize in that. They should get their ham licenses. They should go as far as they're capable of going in terms of not just local VHF handheld radio comms, but HF and regional comms, digital mode capabilities where you can send texts and emails to the next state over. You've got, groups that are working together. And we see this in one disaster after another. And in the Amron SOI, we have an example right there toward the front. Lessons learned from Venezuela and their collapse. And they were saying people had local communications. There were some mixed matched radios and things, but they had no way of communicating outside of their small clustered groups.
Oh,
They had no idea what was happening in the next village,
gotcha.
except for a courier that might show up on a donkey or a motorcycle.
Wow.
But then they didn't know what was happening in the next village past them,
Sure.
where there's fighting, there's roadblocks, there are criminal elements that are organizing that the citizenry are completely clueless about.
Gotcha.
Because they didn't have operational or strategic level communications. They had tactical level, which means you can find out what's going on in your town,
Right.
when the next meeting is going to be,
Mhm.
where, when the doctor's going to be showing up to give people examinations, but
Which is a good distinction, like you say there. You have that tactical level communication
Absolutely.
infrastructure, and just having that as having a significant importance where everybody should be able to have and relay tactical level information.
absolutely.
But yeah, I think hitting on that importance, like you say there, that's something that sometimes we don't necessarily see amongst people who are preparing for harder times. They understand it's a priority, but
Right.
they don't really prioritize it in their own life.
Well, and it takes effort.
Mhm.
It takes time, money, effort. It requires energy. And sometimes it's easier just to say, I'm not interested
Sure.
in what's happening over there.
Hmm.
I live in North Idaho, and I really don't care what's happening in California.
Hmm.
It doesn't affect me. Well, that's true to a degree.
Mhm.
When you're talking about a bridge being out or a checkpoint a few miles down the road warning your local community, or this is where aid and relief is going to be delivered at this place
Hmm.
tomorrow at noon, spread the word, that affects your community.
Yeah.
And so it's valid. You need to know what's going on in your community. Situational awareness about what's local, that's going to impact you first.
Hmm.
However, in one disaster after another around the world, we see the same headlines. People are starving for bread and information.
Gotcha.
Kazakhstan. You look at, there's so many. Maui recently.
Yeah.
People, their greatest need, water and communications.
Yeah.
Venezuela, same thing. They're just as hungry for food as they are for information. And they're not getting information. In Kazakhstan, just before Russia went into Ukraine, there was a government collapse in Kazakhstan.
Mm.
The internet, cell phones, everything was cut off. The commercial power was cut off. The supply chain stopped. People were gathering, and they're right out of European news. I have it in my files. But the headline is, people are hungry for bread and information. And they were literally meeting at the local bakery where they would get their daily bread, because that's where they were able to meet with other people and get information.
And then they're reduced to word of mouth at that point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So local communications is great, But what they did not know is that the Russian military had just crossed their border.
Ah,
They had mobilized their military to come into Kazakhstan to stabilize the country because it descended into absolute anarchy, chaos.
Mm.
And there were civilian versus government forces and different civilian forces that were at odds with each other. Then you have the opportunistic criminal component organizing.
sure. Which
And
always happens whenever you have chaos.
exactly.
Yeah.
So if you have tactical communications in their world meant walking to the bakery to talk to the other people in the neighborhood to find out what they know, and nobody knows anything,
Sure.
much less the knowledge that a foreign military was on their soil and bearing down toward them.
Yeah.
It was just a couple of hours away. With operational or strategic level comms, you can be sharing that information over the mountains and in an environment where you're otherwise completely in the dark as far as comms goes. So you really got to have both. Now, if we go completely grid down in the United States, we lose power, we lose internet, and all you care about is your local community. If you've got a radio operator that's watching Chinese forces land on the coast of California,
Yeah.
you would want to know that.
Now
Your
that does
situational
matter to
awareness.
somebody even up in Idaho. because,
Absolutely. Now, maybe that doesn't mean anything to you today,
Sure.
but what about tomorrow? What about the next day? Where is it safe? Where are forward lines being drawn that gives you safety to move your family to because
Yeah.
the Chinese forces are moving inland?
Mhm.
The United States military is responding. They're setting up, forward lines that you need to get to because you're going to be behind enemy lines. That's the kind of information that people really need to know and want to know.
Right.
Just recently in Maui, the same headlines that we see in every other event, people need water and information. They were literally being told all the information you need will come from the planes.
Mm.
And they were flying these small planes like Cessnas with these giant loudspeakers attached to them, telling them to get water and supplies, what checkpoint to go to. But they had no two-way communication. They were claiming that mobile cell towers were being brought in, but up to almost 3 weeks later, people were still saying, I have no cell coverage, I have no internet coverage. They're telling me that if I leave and cross this checkpoint, I can't re-enter and return to my home, which is completely unaffected, but we're grid down, we have no information. Why ham operators were not providing communications in that area, I don't know, because there are many licensed ham operators in that area that were not directly affected by the fire. So that's a huge problem.
Yeah.
That's a huge problem. Something that we saw that's unique that we have not seen before is the mobile Starlink customers where we're putting the word out that they would meet at X parking lot, and anybody who picks it up on their Wi-Fi can connect free of charge. Here's the password. I can handle up to 200 users.
Wow.
That's revolutionary. That's great. But then that leads into another component of strategic communications, reaching outside of your area and coordinating with entities, multiple entities that are caught up responding to the same event.
Sure.
As this trend toward leaning on satellite communications.
Interesting.
And the question has come up. I'm actually working on a video right now. Has satellites made HF, high frequency radio, obsolete? Of course, the answer to that is no, because of the infrastructure that's involved in supporting satellite. With HF communications, you need no supporting infrastructure whatsoever. You do not have to have commercial power or internet or any other towers or anything to support you. And there's nobody that can decide they don't want you to communicate and flip a switch and shut you off.
You don't want to be censored like they do on social media because they don't like the way you're communicating or who you communicate with.
Absolutely. So you're at the mercy of somebody else choosing to allow you to continue to communicate.
Yeah.
So with HF radio communications,
Even if it's inferior, that independence is really, really helpful.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So you can communicate with somebody on the other end that has a radio, an antenna, and a laptop, and you can send emails and reports and intelligence back and forth to each other. Then you can turn around and inform your local community on their tactical communications, their handheld radios. You can let them know there's a convoy of bottled water and MREs. The National Guard's going to be here tomorrow at noon. Everybody can meet there and get your food and water. But you're given that information by somebody else passing that along to you. What we saw in Maui was a gross breakdown of communications between the government and agencies that had 1,000 or more people on the ground to help with the emergency, but the locals are all claiming universally they cannot get any answers from all this federal government and non-government organizations that are on the ground.
And I think that's significant to note for many of our viewers being inside the continental U.S. and they're thinking, whenever we see illustrations in Kazakhstan, which is pertinent, but then they see, okay, that's over in Europe, and then you get inflicted with the mentality of like, well, that's them, not us, and this is America, doggone it. But this is an illustration we're talking about directly inside the U.S. Maui being in Hawaii, this is U.S. government control. This is our citizens that we're thinking about. Extreme disaster.
Exactly, and we need to learn from what we're watching unfold. And it is not an isolated incident. Hurricane Katrina, an unprecedented event, and the government's response was a disaster within a disaster. Their response was disarming law-abiding citizens from being able to defend themselves. People had no answers. They were stranded. They were actually going after civilians trying to rescue people because they're not official.
That's nuts.
And they were diverting, and this has happened in the floods in Louisiana as well. Law enforcement were diverting from rescuing people to going after and confiscating the boats and citing people who were rescuing people. And so you look at Hurricane Katrina and what an absolute train wreck of a response that was. And, you see officially we've analyzed this, we've assessed, we've taken responsibility and learned so we can make sure these mistakes are never repeated again. Well, forward to multiple other disasters, New Palestine or East Palestine, Ohio, and that really a train wreck. And the government's response was a train wreck surrounding a train wreck. And then Maui. So we need to come to terms with the fact that the government has not learned how to respond in a way that benefits the American citizens. We need to be self-reliant. And that's what happened over there in Maui, where they were literally holding off on supplies that they had gathered to deliver to the people, and the people weren't getting it. The civilian populace was coming in on boats to avoid checkpoints on the roads, bringing in food and water. And some communications with mobile Starlinks. It was the citizens that took responsibility for themselves. Now, still, the citizens couldn't get any information on how to file a claim, and FEMA support, FEMA funding that was supposed to be there, and how do I get housing? And nobody, they're just scores and scores of testimony, people that are so frustrated that they can't get straight answers, with 1,000 federal response personnel and NGOs like Red Cross on the ground, and these people feel completely helpless. Now that's one isolated disaster where the rest of the country is unaffected, where we have the opportunity to bring all resources to bear to focus on this affected area, and how abysmal of a response that was. Imagine if we got hit with a nationwide cyber attack, where there is no help on the way because the government and state agencies Non-government agencies are all in the same boat. They have no comms. They can't get fuel. The supply chain's broken down, and it's everybody for themselves. And we need to be thinking self-reliant, like nobody else is going to come. When they can't even adequately respond to one incident that they can completely focus all their resources on,
During the
and
best
they
of times.
botch it,
Yeah.
then what's going to happen if this is a larger? What happens with Cascadia subduction zone, earthquake and tsunami takes out Portland, Seattle, San Francisco? I know that doesn't break a lot of people's hearts to think about, but we're talking about 1 million plus people dead
Right. Yeah.
and thousands stranded, injured,
Yeah.
with no way to get to them. And the government admitting it could take months to reach everybody in those affected areas.
Yeah.
And they're saying that's one disaster, that it's not a matter of if, but when.
Mm-hmm.
And as crazy as the world's getting, I could see that event taking place while we're getting hit with a Category 5 hurricane, in the southeast, and a train derailment with toxic chemicals. And I mean, it's just, these disasters are coming. The tempo is increasing.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to be self-reliant, and communications has to be centered from that. That's one lesson that we've got to learn from all of these previous disasters that produce the same headline over and over.
Yes.
You could have local communications, which the people in Maui didn't have,
Mhm.
and you have to have operational level communications. That means getting comms off the island, being able to communicate back to help
Mhm.
on the main island. And the other thing is strategic level communications, where you're integrating multiple different entities, organizations, government entities, non-government organizations, or groups. It could be a militia battalion in Washington needing to send reports to the militia battalion in southern Idaho.
Mhm.
Looking at it from a civilian standpoint. So, yeah, it's
All across the board.
a lot of lessons
Importance
to
of
learn,
communications.
and we're just not getting it.
Yeah.
Even in the Patriot community, although that's changing, there's a lot of there are a lot of prepper and patriot groups that are adding communications to their plans.
That's good.
Some taking it more seriously than others.
Yeah.
And there's always that small, 3 to 5% who get it,
Mm-hmm.
and they scramble. But trying to get the rest of your organization to take comms seriously is like pulling teeth.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
They
fair.
drag their feet, and you can't get them to. And sometimes that might be enough just to get them a Baofeng radio
Mhm.
and get them to program it and practice using it once a week or every so often, so that they can remember how to use it. For some people, that's all you're going to be able to do.
Right. So for the people that do understand that importance of communications, I was recently talking to some civilians at a survival 2-day outing, and I introduced the concept of having a PACE plan for communications, which is
Yes.
101 in the military, having a primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency. But for most of them, they actually hadn't heard that. And I think sometimes we forget the things that we were taught and that we learned. So what would you recommend for civilians thinking about setting up a PACE plan? If they have limited time, which almost everybody does, limited capital, resources, and energy to throw at this, what would be the first things that you would have them understand, obtain, get equipped with?
Well, there's kind of two components to that. One is your PACE plan, like you mentioned. That's your primary, alternate, and then contingency, and then emergency. That's your backup to your backup to your backup.
Right.
Right. And then the second component to that is, what's the priority, the order of priority that I should be focusing on, and where do I start?
Yes.
A lot of that depends on your goals. You have personal goals. If you are a leader in an organization, you can have organizational goals.
Mhm.
So that's going to depend on each individual person and their role in
Sure.
this. If you got a guy in your family and you're not really plugged into any group. You want to make sure your family can communicate with each other.
Let's go with that. Like the standard Joe that's thinking about personal protection, defense for his family and home. Maybe
Right.
he's not specifically tied in with any group per se. He might have some brothers in his community that he would like to turn to and be together with if things got really far south. But somebody who's not really plugged into organizational structure.
Right. Well, your PACE plan should pretty much apply to most things in your overall preparedness planning.
Sure.
For example, your primary in a let's say without rule of law environment, your primary is your rifle. Your secondary is you go to your pistol.
Sure.
Your contingency is your backup revolver, ankle holster. That's your contingency, and then your emergency is maybe a combat knife, right?
Yeah.
So that's your sequential order of priorities,
Mm-hmm.
or your, I guess, your primary and alternates. So communications is going to be very similar. If you're just looking out for your family, you're not worried about HF communications to talk to somebody in the next state.
Mm-hmm.
You need to make sure that you can communicate with everybody that you care about.
Mm-hmm.
So your buddy, if he's 5 miles away, or your wife, who's going to go and check the chicken coop and gather chickens or chicken eggs,
Sure.
she can call you when she sees something suspicious on the backside of the property or somebody's moving around. You have immediate tactical comms.
Mm-hmm.
And then just a couple guys moving around in the woods. There's a truck parked back there, and they're looking pretty shady. Your wife alerts you. Your next layer, tactical comms. Now you call your buddy that's 3 or 4 miles down the road and say, "Man, I need some help." Right.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to figure out how to be able to get a hold of him.
Mm-hmm.
And so your primary is going to be your cell phone, right? And then so you have grid up PACE plan,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have grid down PACE plan. So if you're in a SHTF world and all conventional comms are down,
Mm-hmm.
work out a plan for you to be able to communicate with them and practice with that.
Mm-hmm.
Don't just buy a couple Baofangs and program them and stand across the yard from each other. He needs to be at his house, and you need to practice with that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you need to get an external antenna outside of your house mounted on your eave?
And that's one of the primary purposes why you guys have regularly established practice nets. Right?
Absolutely. You would practice with it regularly, especially your operational and strategic level comms,
Mm-hmm.
because any one of those operators will tell you, if you do not train, if you don't practice regularly, you will not communicate when it really hits the fan.
Yeah, and I can think of correlations to more so like the defense industry with gun owners. You have those gun owners that have the polished, beautiful piece that just sits and in their safe.
Right.
It never goes to the range, and then on the one beautiful, like perfect day they do take it out, something messes up. Like the zero is completely off. The muzzle brake flies off. Whatever it is, it ceases to function properly. And they just don't work with it enough to know that it's going to be reliable in the way that they have it set up. So completely get it.
Now, and the lower you are on the lower echelon, I guess you are on the comms ladder.
Mm-hmm.
If you and your buddy just have a Baofeng and you never practice with it, you did that one time.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden a wildfire breaks out, and cell phone tower is down, and fiber optic lines are burned up, and now you're going, "Hey, we need to get our radios out in case we lose our comms." And then your buddy pulls his out, and my battery's dead.
Sure.
And and so then you're fumbling.
Right.
So that's why you need to regularly practice and test your gear to make sure it's functioning properly.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure that you have things updated. You have maybe your local repeaters programmed in,
Mm-hmm.
and this local ham club changes their PL tone on their repeater to activate the repeater. You're not staying up on it because it happened last year. You're not tuning into the local ham club's nets to make sure everything's functioning. Even if you're not licensed to transmit, you can still listen, stay informed.
Yeah.
But anyway, keeping up with your equipment. The other thing too that we've seen, speaking of repeaters,
Mm-hmm.
uh, a lot of times wildfires, like in Washington State in 2015, we deployed a team to support a small town that was completely grid down. They had no cell, no internet, no landline. Their power was down.
Was that in Washington
They had
State?
no water. Yeah, that was in Concanoli, a small
Gotcha.
town called Concanoli. So we went and provided communication support for them, and we were escorted to meet the fire chief and the mayor.
Mm-hmm.
They had no communications or communication support, and the county was spread thin. There's multiple wildfires all over the place.
Sure.
Well, incidentally, uh, the a couple of the main fires took out the mountains, the repeaters that were on top of those mountains, and that meant the state police, the local ham club, a commercial tower repeater for your local businesses, local trucking company or towing company. Uh, so commercial was down. There were a couple of other reflectors on there, I think, for a commercial radio station.
Mm-hmm.
And there were a couple of mountains where they lost repeaters. There was only one ham radio repeater
Mm-hmm.
operational as far as we knew in that area. And it
Gotcha.
became unusable because everybody is trying to clear this frequency. We need it for this emergency.
Gotcha.
And you've got the local county areas, emergency, operations
Mm-hmm.
trying to use it. You've got ham radio operators belonging to Aries trying to report in fires. So the only repeater that was left was virtually unusable because it was so congested
Gotcha.
on that repeater. So we were able to provide communications over HF to reach outside the area and pass along official traffic for them and relay, and also a lot of welfare traffic.
Mm-hmm.
The news is reporting this town's burned to the ground, and there's family members watching the news,
Right.
like that's where my uncle lives, that's where my dad works,
Yeah.
and no other information. So we were able to provide through amateur radio. There are a couple of different ways that you can send messages through these services that will allow you to send an email or a text even.
Mm-hmm.
So their loved ones were able to receive texts from this isolated cutoff area.
Wow.
Hey, I'm fine. We're fine. The fire is not threatening us right now, but we're watching it. We're okay. Well, the
Yeah.
last thing they heard, this town was burned to the ground.
Yeah.
So they were able to send emails to loved ones. We were able to facilitate that through this amateur radio service that provides that capability.
Yeah. And like you say, fires. That's something that's it's a real threat to a lot of people, especially in the Pacific Northwest. We just had a local fire rip through a couple of small towns
Yes.
and knocked out probably hundreds of homes and
Killed a
Just-
couple people.
yeah.
And once again, they were cut off. Cell phone towers were damaged.
Yeah.
Power was cut, and it can happen anywhere at any time. And I think
Right.
we're going to see a lot more of that in our future.
Yeah.
And we have a very good chance of facing a civil defense type of an environment
Mm-hmm.
with the civil breakdown in our country. That's without any external interference.
Sure.
But then we also have Russia and China, particularly, they're preparing for war with the United States, and unfortunately, we don't have what we used to have, and that was civil defense.
Yeah.
Where citizens were involved in preparing themselves, food, water, shelter, how to report an enemy if you spot, an enemy, practicing regularly on, tuning into the radio to get reports, and that's gone. And civil defense, which was an official government program,
Mm-hmm.
has been replaced with COG, or continuity of government.
Mm-hmm.
So the entire focus now is making sure the government continue to function and the civilian population aren't included in that, other than this parasitic type of relationship. We need to feed you, shelter you, give you rules, tell you where to go, tell you what to do. You have to
Yeah.
report in here. But there's no proactive role for the citizens if we find ourselves in war, which is drawing ever closer. China and Russia are heavily involving their civilian population in preparing for war. I mean, you have high school kids that are incorporating, field stripping and reassembling AK-47s as part of their curriculum.
Gotcha.
And,
And here in the U.S., if you say gum too loud, not even gun, but gum, you're going to have a school lockdown because
Right.
of the fear factor around guns and school zones.
well, here in the United States, we're kicking kids out of school because they're not using proper pronouns. And that's a serious problem. We're in trouble.
Yeah.
So,
But communications being one of the forefront skills that we need to have for civil defense. And you mentioned ham radio operators. So
Yeah.
would that be something that you would suggest for the standard person that is alarmed, but he doesn't know exactly what to do? Is that one of the first steps you would recommend, is getting that license?
absolutely. And you don't have to be, you don't have to have a license to take some measures. Let's go back to the prioritization.
Yeah.
We talked about having local two-way tactical communications.
Mhm.
Have a way of contacting your buddy down the road. Have a way of your wife being able to call up from the back 40 to be able to have two-way communications. Secondly, you need to have local community situational awareness. Once again, you don't have to have a license to have a scanner,
Sure.
but you should get a scanner. Now, if all of your local agencies have gone to digital modes, P25, there are scanners that will decode P25 digital communications.
Mhm.
Most communities, especially in rural communities, still communicate on analog radio, which means an analog, standard, inexpensive scanner
Mhm.
will allow you to plug in the police, fire, EMS, Department of Transportation, the local airport, the local tow truck company,
Gotcha.
the local lumber yard.
Mhm.
I mean, you could anything in there. Your local ham radio frequencies, the repeater frequencies.
Mhm.
You can punch all that in, and I have seen multiple yard sales with scanners, perfectly working Radio Shack scanner for $10
Sure.
with dust on it. You take it home, dust it off, and it works. And you plug. I have 3 of them that I picked up for. I think the most expensive one I paid was $20.
Yeah.
I've got one that I paid $10 for, and one that I paid $5 for.
Nice.
So you can have one out in your shop, and you can have one in your ham shack,
Mhm.
and maybe put one in Faraday. So all pre-programmed and ready to go, stashed away, so that you could pull that out later.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting to be able to tune into Forest Service and fire, ground to air support frequencies when there's fires.
Yeah.
And they're fighting fires in your area. Your local fire department, your sheriff's department, when they're talking about, let's get ready to start evacuating XXX, you're getting that way ahead of the general population and the public.
Because most people are waiting to tell the sheriff's deputy is on their front step if he's able to respond to that and actually give you heads
If
up.
that deputy ever even shows up
Yeah.
to give you that. Because in Maui, somebody with an analog scanner
Mhm.
can listen to the fire and police talk about exactly where this fire is going, what roads they're getting ready to block off, what routes they're getting ready to barricade,
Mhm.
and your situational awareness puts you so far ahead of the rest of the people as far as making informed decisions.
Yeah.
None of that requires a license.
Yeah.
And but it's something that's critical.
Mhm.
So, and you can dive into this rabbit hole as deep as you want to go, and you spend as much money on it as you want. But there are some minimal things: two-way tactical communications between the people you care about and want to reach.
Mhm.
Practice with that. Make sure that you regularly confirm that everything's working as you expect and need it to,
Mhm.
and get local situational awareness.
So, what kind of equipment would you suggest to support that tactical level operations communications? Would that be a couple
Right.
of things? or-
In the last few years, the whole world has got Baofeng fever,
Okay.
and there is no vaccine for it. So, pretty much that's where everybody's going to go, and that's where everybody's telling them to go.
Okay.
Personally, I recommend going to something that's more robust I have an aversion to Chinese-made electronics because I don't know what's hidden in there. But that's the fastest way to get somebody the ability to communicate with each other.
Mhm.
And you can get those for $25-$30 a piece. And like I often said, YouTube is your friend.
Yeah.
All right. Anything now, YouTube isn't very friendly toward the conservative patriot community.
Sure.
But look, you can't beat it when you need to find a video on how to replace your brake calipers on your truck or how to rebuild a carburetor on your chainsaw.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a wealth of information. Well, that goes for ham radio too.
Mhm.
Any radio you pick up, you can find a video on how to program it, what you need, accessories that go with it, evaluations on different accessories, what antenna works better, little comparisons, and so on. So
if you didn't want to pick up Baofangs, what would you advocate for?
Well, Yaesu, I think Yaesu and Kenwood radios those would be ham radios, Superb, ICOM radios, but it's also a matter of budget and things are really tight. So I would say probably the next one would be I'm drawing a blank too, and it's one that I definitely recommend. Chinese.
It's not the Wuxon.
The Wuxon is actually a good radio, and that was my first handheld ham radio.
Okay.
Definitely more robust for field use compared to a Baofeng.
Yeah, that's the reason why I picked it up, is because a firefighter just blasted through so many Baofangs out in the field.
Right.
And I wanted something that was hardy, and he was like, "Hey, this Wuxon hasn't failed me yet." So. Yeah.
The radio I was trying to think of was an Anytone.
Okay.
Anytone, Anytone. Probably my favorite radio out there, outside of the more expensive amateur radio handhelds.
Okay.
Yeah, the Anytones are they're just really great. And what I would recommend, if you've got nothing and you're starting off, I would recommend getting an Anytone DMR, that's digital mobile radio, DMR analog, one that'll do both analog and DMR.
Yeah, and that was something we were actually discussing offline before you started the interview, and you were explaining why you would like to have different capabilities depending on the scenario, how both have their strengths and weaknesses.
Absolutely. Okay, so first of all, if I would not get just a DMR radio. Okay, I would if you have a DMR radio and a analog radio, talking handhelds here.
Yeah.
I would get an analog, hands down. But if you have nothing, you're starting off at zero, then look for and find a analog DMR radio.
Okay.
And there are some different characteristics. DMR, digital mobile radio, is relatively new in the ham radio community. And that allows you to use digital modes, so you can hit a local repeater that's connected to the internet. And you put in, I guess for a lack of a better term, like a routing number, and then you can pop out on a DMR in another part of the world and talk to a guy driving down the road in his truck while you're sitting at home talking on your DMR radio, either directly over the internet or with your radio connected to a hotspot.
Okay.
And for me, I think it's neat. That's the hobby side of ham radio.
Sure.
It's just fun. That's for the guys that really just geek out over all the different things that you can get into in ham radio.
Yeah.
But that is dependent on the internet.
Yeah.
As soon as the grid goes down, your DMR is done. Except you can still communicate in simplex. That means direct, radio to radio. So you're not going through a repeater you can connect between two radios, digital DMR.
Okay.
Direct.
But you're saying that if you don't have good connectivity or good line of sight there, then you may get nothing, as opposed to a broken message you might still be able to read.
Right. Yeah. The disadvantage to DMR, just direct with you and your buddy, is that if you got a hill between you, or for some reason you don't have a really solid path, it will not send the message. It will not come through. It'll just be pure silence. You won't even know that he's trying to reach you. Now, with analog, if you and I have a hill between us and we're a few miles away, you might hear, I need help.
Yeah.
You know, and that's all you get.
Sure.
Right. You know, well, you heard help. I need help. And then the rest was broken up. Okay, I'm rolling your direction because I don't know what's going on, but I know you need help, right?
Yeah.
Analog will, you know, they'll allow that broken message to come through.
I had a funny experience with that broken message one time when I had a medical emergency, actually. I was out in the field, in the middle of nowhere, and I had these middle students that one of the guys had something. I was trying to report his condition over the radio to the medic. And I told him, yeah, he's reporting he has numbness in his legs. Well, that didn't come through. Everybody swore that I said, yeah, this dude, he's got a numb penis. And they're like, wait a second, what did you just say on the radio? I'm like, yeah. So, yeah, broken sometimes.
Oh, that could just open up all kinds of, I could see. Yeah, people having fun with that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and there's a lot to be said about communicating clearly and getting your message through that you want.
Yeah.
You know, for sure. And there are a lot of funny stories out there about, you know, communications breakdowns, just like that. But, you know, here's the thing. Why I recommend DMR.
Mm-hmm.
I've never been a big fan of, I don't need DMR. Don't care about it. I don't want to connect to a hotspot and talk to somebody in another part of the country because we're connected over the internet.
Sure.
And it pops out on his hotspot to his radio. I mean, that's a novelty.
Mm-hmm.
That's the hobby, geeky side of something that I think it's just really neat.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't have time for that.
Sure.
However, the eye-opener for me was when Russia went into Ukraine
Mm-hmm.
with analog radios, no encryption, and this is the first time in the history of war that we've ever experienced this. You have soldiers openly talking on analog VHF frequencies.
Mm-hmm.
The civilians are using SDR, software-defined radio dongles, listening, intercepting their transmissions, with Russian soldiers frustrated. They're lost. I don't have a map. I need fuel. I don't know where to go. Then they're arguing with each other. And you have civilians intercepting all of this, live streaming it on the internet.
Wow.
So people around the world are tuned in, listening to real-time communications of Russian soldiers and the breakdown in their communications.
Gotcha.
DMR radio, which are available on these civilian ham radios, allow for encryption. Now, you cannot legally use encryption on ham radio.
Okay.
But you can encrypt MERS. That's the multi-use radio service. It's a portion of the commercial band, or business band, I should say.
Okay.
So the business band is for businesses. You have a private, let's say, a roofing company, or you have maybe a medical supply company and a delivery company. Well, they have these commercial radio licenses. They're allowed to use encryption.
Yeah. Especially if they have to transmit HIPAA related.
Exactly. So you have this medical fast delivering organs to surgery, and they're discussing this over the air. They want to allow for people, or you might have just say a business. You might have a building contractor discussing something related to a client, and you have maybe proprietary business information or private information about one of your clients that's about billing information or bank account, whatever. So it's perfectly permissible to have encryption on the business bands. The MERS frequencies are VHF, and there's 5 channels that are shared with the business band. So it's perfectly legal. Now, if the Chinese invade, Russia invades, anybody invades, we go to war, our government's like collapse, nowhere to be found. You're not really worried about the FCC running around issuing citations.
Sure.
You could use that encryption anywhere you see fit. You know, if you're in a total world collapse environment,
Yeah.
zombie apocalypse, right?
Yeah.
Well, then you have a piece of equipment that is capable of doing that, or anywhere that you can program a frequency
Mhm.
on that radio. So
So now I can have encrypted digital line of sight voice.
absolutely,
That's pretty
and
rad.
you can practice with it
Mhm.
legally now.
Nice.
So you can step outside of the bounds if the situation calls for it. Lives are at stake. Your country's at war.
Mhm.
There's no functioning government. You know, you find yourself in that environment.
See, that's crazy to me because it must be because of the DMR capabilities.
Yeah.
Because whenever we were talking about our survival-based radios, and one of the biggest things we wanted to stress to our guys on the ground talking to recovery, whether they were another ground force or up in the air, they just need to know line of sight voice is unencrypted, which means you got to talk in an encrypted fashion so the enemy doesn't, get that intel,
That's right.
or just don't pass information that could be tactical information.
That's right.
So, but that's huge.
Exactly. And you are at a disadvantage in deciding what might be valuable to an adversary.
Yeah.
You don't get to choose. That's, OPSEC is so important.
Mhm.
In your mind, well, it's not really that important. It's not classified, or it's not secret. Everybody probably already knows this.
Mhm.
Well, you don't know that was that unclassified piece of information was gold to the guy that intercepted it, because it was something he didn't know.
Yeah.
And it changes everything for him, and you're clueless to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, anytime you can, well, first of all, remember, anything you put out over the air can be intercepted.
Mhm.
Now, if it's encrypted, they might be able to intercept it, but also know that just the fact that somebody is operating in your vicinity with encryption is valuable intelligence.
Good point. Yeah.
Even if they can't hear what you're saying, that alone could be very valuable.
Sure.
So,
But you were saying also that if somebody has like an analog scanner, they're not going to even receive that DMR messaging, right?
right,
Yeah.
exactly. And if they have a digital mode scanner, a scanner that includes digital modes,
Mhm.
it's just going to be, if it's encrypted, it's just going to be garbled. It's going to be just an annoying, humming, buzzing, garbly sound.
Yeah.
That they can't make use of. So I would say, from a civil defense standpoint, we need to be thinking like that.
Mhm.
I mean, real world, we have responded to wildfires, hurricanes, floods, numerous different real world examples. Encryption isn't needed or desired in
Sure.
that type of situation. You're helping your fellow countrymen. You're providing emergency communications. Now, you also want some level of privacy.
Mhm.
When you have, and there are certain services that we can use that is very difficult for somebody to be able to listen in on.
Okay.
When you get into HF,
Mhm.
especially, there are modes that are very difficult for people to intercept and make use of that information.
Okay.
So, if you're if you have maybe you're facilitating sending of an email.
Mhm.
Somebody's in a small town that's isolated. This guy wants to send an email to his daughter, and maybe what he's saying is, private and personal and intimate and emotional,
Mhm.
that kind of thing, for their dignity. It's nice to know that we have some modes that, like, every geek out there can't just intercept it and stream it on the internet and, embarrass or humiliate somebody, or just violate their dignity.
Yeah.
Ends up, some news reporter puts it out on their local news or something. So there are, even without encryption, there are ways that you can make it very difficult for anybody but the two parties connected to each other to be able to know what's being said.
Okay.
So from a tactical OPSEC, PERSEC, COMSEC perspective, those are also helpful in a civil defense environment.
Okay.
So you can use that type of what adds kind of privacy, not encryption, but just it's more private. Now you add encryption to that,
Yeah.
you have some pretty solid communications capabilities. If you practice now, you train with it now,
Mhm.
you don't have to practice sending encryption over ham radio and break the law. We don't advocate that, and we don't do that. We don't have to do that
Got it.
because I can send you an email
Mhm.
by just say, hey, how's it going? Just testing out my comms. Okay, now we know that our radios work and I can send a piece of text to you.
Gotcha.
Now, I also know that I can send you encryption. I can text it to you on our phones or send it to you in an email over regular internet, and that's perfectly legal. We know that we can merge those two things in a civil defense environment,
Gotcha.
that I can copy and paste an encrypted piece of text into this ham radio software
Mhm.
and send it to you. And of course, if you're in a civil defense situation, the first thing they're going to do is ban ham radio.
Sure.
Whether it's our government or the invading force,
Mhm.
they're going to impose all kinds of rules on what the civilian populace can and can't do.
Sure.
No guns, no ham radio. I mean, it's all going to be illegal unless they approve it. Well, your ham radio is your training ground because in a civil defense environment, you're at war. You're not a ham radio operator anymore.
Mhm.
You are a civil defense radio operator now. You are a tactical radio operator now. You're supporting whatever the resistance against the invading force. You're not a ham operator. That's over now.
Sure.
You're going to use tactical call signs. You're going to use encryption. You're going to use TTPs that you would not use as a normal ham operator. But you acquire those skills.
Mhm.
If you weren't in the military, where else are you going to acquire skills necessary to operate in that environment?
Sure.
Other than ham radio,
Gotcha.
using the equipment. So you're using combining all of these skills. Now, the military only gives you limited amount of exposure to, I guess, civil defense communications.
Mhm.
Uh,
Because primarily you're focused with military-specific radio systems.
You have a complete, total support infrastructure.
Mhm.
You're not creating your own crypto. It's issued to you.
Right. You have the keys that are just inserted.
It's all coming from the NSA, which they've given themselves backdoors to all that stuff.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
I mean, with the people inside of our government potentially helping an invading force that could turn that stuff over, we can control our own keys in the civilian world. You can generate and create your own encryption. The equipment is different. The equipment in the military is made for integrating with satellites and other systems that are all government controlled and owned that could be compromised or taken out.
Yeah.
Satellites are one of the first things that are going to go because that's the Achilles heel to our government and non-government organizations and our military. Satellites. They can become so completely dependent on them. It's a natural target, a strategic target for our adversaries.
Sure.
But they can't get that pacifier out of their mouth.
Yeah.
The military and several different branches have been really trying to return back to HF communications as a backup because they're understanding the vulnerability.
Interesting.
From satellites. Unfortunately, we've got a lot of civilian patriot or preparedness groups that have gone to satellite phones
rather than
and they're skipping everything else except their Baofeng.
Gotcha.
So they're the same vulnerability. You're latching on to that's like taking a ride on an M1 Abrams with anti-tank missiles inbound, right?
Yeah.
So you latch onto that, your comms are going to be taken out.
Gotcha.
Now it works great in a situation like Maui or any other natural disaster, a non-civil defense type of operating environment. That's different.
Yeah. Now, with that said, I know you brought some different examples. Did you want to talk through any of these pieces?
Well,
the pros and cons, or what you would recommend to upscale and help with that base plan?
Yeah. Like I said, okay, we're kind of breaking this up, and it's kind of hard not to skip and jump around.
Yeah.
So thanks for bringing me back to that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that first step is your tactical two-way communications, and then situational awareness, your ability to receive what's going on. That's your
Scanners.
That's your scanner.
Yeah.
A digital scanner, if you can, one that will do both analog and digital.
Mm-hmm.
For two-way communications, I recommend digital modes and start exploring. The anytones are probably the most user-friendly or least technical for you to program that's out there right now.
Okay.
So you can find a YouTube video, learn how to program it, learn how to set encryption, get that taken care of. The next step is, even if you can't transmit, at least get the ability to receive HF, high frequency communications. Now, very little is going to be done on voice. You will get a lot on voice because a lot of guys, they talk on voice. The problem is propagation is very difficult on the HF voice, 100 watts and less.
Okay.
You can tune in and listen to the nets, and these guys come booming in. But most all of these guys are running power.
Okay.
And what that means is a linear amplifier where they're able to put out 500 or 1,000 or 1,500 watts.
Mm.
And it sounds wonderful right now in peacetime.
Mm. In
wartime or civil defense environment, right, an extended disaster, say a cyber attack or, excuse me, a solar flare, this is essentially data. So there are data modes that sounds much like the old internet landline connections or a fax machine.
Sure.
Right, those are data modes. Well, ham radio has developed data modes. Some are fast, some are slow. Maybe the slower ones have a way lower error rate.
Okay.
So you can get more of your data through, but it takes way longer.
Gotcha.
There are some data modes that are much faster, but they have a higher error rate if you don't have a perfect, connection with the other person. But anyway, that is how you are going to receive reports and situation reports, status reports, executive summaries that the Amron puts out over the air to give updates, or people can report what's happening at their local area.
Sure.
If you tune in to the amateur radio bands and listen to voice communications, most of the time it is very difficult to hear what they're saying. It's scratchy, it's garbled, unless they're running a lot of power. But one note on that, these guys that are running linear amplifiers, if we have a cyber attack, it takes down our power grid, most of these guys are going to vanish because only a few of these people have real backup power capabilities. And on top of that, once you do, let's say after 10 days, they've exhausted their fuel, or they have to cut back to maybe once a day. And you'll start seeing more and more of these people drop off. They're not going to be able to run that kind of power for an extended period of time. Most of them won't. Yeah. But with much less power, you can send the digital modes that I was talking about, or data modes. So I could send a report. And the difference is like me trying to read you a newspaper article over HF when it's very difficult to hear. Sure. You get a lot of fading, but I can send you that during a data mode and you can read it. Nice. So it's like reading somebody the newspaper versus being able to just read an actual copy of the newspaper. Got it. And it's totally revolutionized ham radio, being able to send data reports, and we can send pictures, images. You can tune into satellite for satellites that are functioning. You can get maps, NOAA maps of weather reports. Gotcha. I mean, it opens up. You can actually get news articles from areas that might not be impacted. Right. There are services through WinLink where you could connect to a distant HF radio node where maybe they're unaffected. They have internet.
Gotcha.
where they compile the news headlines. Then you can download that over radio.
Okay.
You can't do that with the voice.
Got it.
So it just opens up so many more possibilities. The software to do this is free,
Nice.
and all it takes, it will operate on a Linux operating system. It'll operate on Windows,
Mm-hmm.
including also Android. There are some programs that operate on Android.
Okay.
They're limited,
Yeah.
as far as what type of modes they'll cover or different features that they have. But like I said, it's revolutionary. So more is being added to this all the time.
So those kind of systems, does that correspond over the internet, or would you have it hooked up to your HF antenna at your house or something?
Well, it's audio based.
Okay.
So what you would do is you'd have, let's say, your shortwave radio with an audio patch cable
Okay.
connected to your laptop, your microphone in,
Mhm.
or you can also hold it up next to the speaker on your radio and receive it. Hold your laptop up next to it. You can hold your cell phone up next to it. The microphone, built-in microphone, will receive. And of course, we don't have enough time to go into all of these, but just to pique the interest of the listeners or those viewers to know what's out there, that it's not just about a Baofeng radio and I'm going to talk to each other and I don't care about what's happening outside my community.
Sure.
There might come a time when you might really care about what's happening outside your community.
Mm-hmm.
The first example that I gave you, which is in our printed SOI in Venezuela, they're saying instead of all these isolated, cloistered groups communicating with each other, they said if there was a network connecting all of these little pockets of communities, that would be golden, and the ham operators would be heroes in their communities if they existed there.
Sure.
And I can point to numerous examples where the ham radio operators were the heroes in emergencies, and I'm proud to be a part of that. To have been able to connect somebody to their loved ones when there was absolutely no other way.
Sure.
Other than driving down a road that's threatened by wildfires that they may or may not be able to make it out on.
Sure.
That I was able to, our team was able to connect them to loved ones, connect firefighters with other firefighting apparatus to coordinate bringing in dozers, heavy equipment operators, other communications with the city and their firefighting team with the U.S. Forest Service that they otherwise would not have had.
Yeah.
And that's just one example. I mean, rescuing people off the roofs of their houses in hurricane flooded areas and other great testimonies that Amron operators have been a part of.
That's really neat.
Yeah. So
very special. Yeah. So we've looked at a lot of different recommendations for people getting those capabilities up, getting their license, getting that receiving capability across the different modes. Anything else that you'd like to add on to that for like somebody who's just coming into it and they really are starting off at square one with alternate communications?
Yeah. First of all, be patient. The people that are proficient in all of the stuff that I've talked about have been in it for a long time.
Okay.
They started off with a Baofeng, not knowing what all those little buttons on the front mean.
Sure.
Or what they're for or how to use them.
Yeah.
And they learn. So it's about eating the elephant one bite at a time.
Okay.
Start off with that local two-way communications, then local situational awareness, your scanner, get your license, and get your license. Ham radio is your training ground. And people are concerned about, what if they come for them and then you're a name on the list? You're already a name on the list. How many firearms do you own?
Exactly.
Or how many times have you been to a gun show? Or what do you view on the internet? Don't shortchange yourself, your group, or your family by depriving yourself and them of necessary skills that you need to acquire now. Keep putting one foot in front of the other. learn as much as you can on your own. Take ownership of it.
Mhm.
Don't wait for somebody to come along and spoon feed you because you need an Elmer, that's your mentor, to sit there and babysit you and walk you through everything.
Mhm.
Because everything you need to know is out there. Amron Core is the paid version of our uh, membership.
Mhm.
That's where people accelerate because there's such a support network there.
Nice.
There are people there that say, "Man, I'm trying to program. I'm trying to get this set up. It's not working right. I don't know what setting I'm supposed to put here." Or
Sure.
and then somebody's right there to say, "Well, try this. Click on that.
Mhm.
Yay, it's working."
Yeah.
So the guys are really going from unlicensed. I got a CB radio in my garage to now I'm an HF radio operator running digital modes. 18 months later,
Mhm.
and I'm right there with the team because of the support network that's there. As
Nice.
fast as you want to grow and go,
Mhm.
you can. And the budget, there's inexpensive ways to get into it, and the sky's the limit on how much you can spend on it.
Right. Yeah. It's an endless frontier.
Yeah,
Spend your
absolutely.
whole life.
But you can spend $650 for a perfectly functional AR-15.
Yeah.
Or you can spend $4,500 on one.
Mm-hmm.
And the $4,500 one is just as deadly as the $650 one.
Sure.
So the same thing with the ham radio. They're $500 HF radio.
Mhm.
You pick one up, used or at a ham fest for a few $100
Mhm.
plus a tuner, or you can spend $1,000 on a brand new one that's got all the bells and whistles and the warranty.
Sure.
But you could definitely it's really important
Mhm.
that a group is invested. A family or a group has the capability to at least receive HF digital capabilities.
Yeah.
And invest in your comms team by getting a couple people licensed, the equipment that they need to provide strategic level communications to reach outside your area, just to stay informed if nothing else.
Yeah.
Or to put out information. Boy, I wish I could tell somebody what I'm seeing right now, but
Right.
all I got is a Baofeng, and I can tell my wife, but she already knows. But this is some serious stuff we're watching, and I have no way of telling somebody.
Right. Yeah.
Here's another thing too. On your journey,
Mhm.
you can meet other ham operators, and a lot of times that HF capable operator that's been doing this for 12 years, you're way behind him, but you can reach him on VHF.
Mhm.
He's your link to the outside world.
Sure.
He's the guy that you can say, "Hey, can you send this message to so and so?" And he's also your person that you can tell your friends, family, loved ones in other states.
Mhm.
This is the frequency of this local ham guy that's down the road from me that I have VHF direct contact with.
Right.
All right. And if you can get a ham operator, this is how to reach him. This is his call sign. This is, this is how to get a hold of me
Mhm.
because I don't have that capability yet. But while you're on your journey, fill that gap with the other ham operators. And ham operators are the most selfless, willing people that you'll want to meet. They're always looking for a mission.
Yeah.
Hey, in case of an emergency, would you? Oh, heck yeah! Show me an emergency, and I'm on it. Right.
Yeah.
So
And usually you can find a really good mentor too that will
Absolutely.
help you through those stages and get you there faster.
you betcha.
Yeah.
You bet.
That's awesome. Well, really appreciate everything that you shared today. It's been an awesome time. Where can people listen to you? Because I know you're doing a talk show radio right now.
Yeah.
Where can
Yeah.
they tune in and hear more?
Well, for communications related
Mhm.
content, go to amron.com. That's AMRRON.com. We need to clean up the website. I get it, but you can still find a lot of stuff on there. We have a bi-weekly newsletter called the Amron Beacon
Okay.
that you can read all kinds of little tidbits and stuff about communications.
Mhm.
From the drop-down tabs, there's about Amron. You can learn more about our mission statement. And then there's, getting started for the new person. It kind of walks you through that. Another thing we want to clean up and really tighten up for folks.
Mhm.
And just start getting involved. Get yourself on that journey, and take your time. Don't get overwhelmed by it. It feels overwhelming at first,
Mhm.
but just keep keep whittling away at it. But this all started with the weekly podcast, Radio Free Redoubt, in 2011.
Yeah.
And then, that was to promote the American Redoubt conservative stronghold, conservative values.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as a former radio operator communicator, I'm like, there is no standardized plan for like-minded patriots to coordinate with each other if something serious went down.
Sure.
So I started with the CH3 project. That's the unlicensed FRS, MERS, CB.
Okay.
And then that grew into Amron, and then incorporating your licensed ham operators and those operations into it in 2012. And that just grew from there.
Gotcha.
So still, the weekly podcast goes every Sunday evening at 8 p.m. And it's live streamed, and then that's uploaded to our Podbean site.
Okay.
And at radiofreeredoubt.com, you can click on the Listen to RFR tab, and there's several different ways. There's links for how you can listen to the live show or the previous shows that are uploaded to Podbean, along with the weekday shows that I do with my wife, Lady Liberty,
yes,
each weekday morning at 7 a.m. Pacific. And that's on Liberty Broadcasting, which is a American Christian Network affiliate out of Spokane, Washington.
And that's called the Morning Commute.
That's the Morning Commute. Yeah. You can also find us on Telegram. We have a channel called The Morning Commute.
Okay.
Really simple. And it's the Morning Commute with JJS and Lady Liberty on 96.5 FM, AM 630. The station also provides a live stream, and then those are all archived at the same Podbean site. So you can listen to the weekly podcast or the weekday shows all at the same place. Download and listen, share them with your friends.
Perfect.
You bet.
That's awesome. Well, thanks so much for all the time and the tips and
thanks for
the
having
wisdom
me
on all these topics. I'm sure all listeners are really excited to start getting into it, as
Absolutely.
am I. So,
Appreciate it. Now get your comms up.
yeah. Thanks. All right.